Well, that was a huge blow. This was the first time since 1866 that the Senate had not allowed the President of the United States to fill a vacancy on the Supreme Court. So that was a big blow. We think the problem, the polarization that faces our democracy began earlier. It really began in the 1990s, and it's been slowly building and helped to bring us Trump. So certainly the events of the late Obama administration were signs of what is to come. It's obviously gotten much worse under Trump, but it's been going on for about a generation.
This line you talk about, institutional forbearance that you describe that has been fraying since the 90s, is it fair to say this is on steroids under Donald Trump? And indeed, even his big line about draining the swamp, is that analogous to not adhering to this sort of thing? And does that mean his voters wanted this to happen?
Well, draining the swamp is akin to a sort of anti-establishment appeals made by politicians really across the world, especially in recent years, sort of right-wing populist politicians. So, in a sense, Trump is very similar to anti-immigrant far-right populists in Europe. The main difference is he's found his way into power, unlike most of Western Europe. Um, and as you pointed out, he is a norm breaker on steroids. This term forbearance we use for the use of restraint in exercising one's institutional power. The president of the United States, just like any prime minister, has a tremendous amount of power if you actually look at the formal rules. And one of them we've discovered recently, there's an 1807 law in the United States that allows the president to mobilize the military and send in the troops against U.S. citizens across the country. That is something that the law has been used periodically, but it's never been seriously used to repress American citizens. But Donald Trump, who has never exercised restraint in the use of power, is now threatening to do it. So a president who is unwilling to be restrained in his use of power and his use of his constitutional prerogatives is a threat to democracy, and that's what we're facing right now.
The pictures this week were, first of all, that clearing before curfew of Washington DC protesters, which most of them seemed peaceful. I think some were reported to be throwing objectives or missiles at the police, but relatively harmless ones, so nothing that was going to maim anybody. And then Donald Trump, with his entourage, holding up this Bible. The tweet from someone who used to run CIA operations in Europe and Asia, Mark Polymeropoulos, apologies if I got his pronunciation incorrect there, he tweeted, Saddam, Bashar, Gaddafi, they all did this.
Yeah, this is pretty unprecedented in the United States to use tear gas to clear a legal protest just so the president can walk by for a photo op. Literally using tear gas against citizens peacefully assembled so the president can walk by. This is something that dictators across the world, not just Saddam and Bashar al-Assad are extreme cases, but this is something. I studied Latin America. This is something that Latin American dictators used to do in the middle part of the 20th century.
I guess, albeit in a much more brutal way than the US authorities were doing it. I guess the final question is, this new style, if you like, or this smashing of institutional forbearance, does it last? What happens after Trump? Does that depend a lot as well on whether he gets a second term? I mean, if this is the new norm for 8 years, how does the Republican Party, for one, switch back to being what it used to be, even if you say you think that's more, 90s and before?
Well, that's a big question. I think if Trump is reelected, which is continues to be a possibility, I think our democracy as we know it is going to start to look a lot different. I think our democratic institutions are going to come under serious threat. If the Republicans lose, I think it remains to be seen whether the party will sort of renovate, find a new leadership, and find its way back into the Democratic game, or whether it will sort of continue to be Trumpist. I don't think anybody knows at this point. I'm somewhat concerned because the base of the Republican Party is a very angry base. I mean, to oversimplify a little bit, the Republican Party now represents white Christians in the United States. It's an overwhelmingly white Christian party. White Christians used to be a dominant majority in the United States. As the country grows more diverse, as we take steps towards racial equality, white Christians no longer dominate. And that loss, the loss of that majority, the loss of dominance, has made the Trumpist base, the Republican Party base, very, very angry, very radicalized. And my fear is that after Trump, we'll see a new leader elected through the primaries who maybe is less inept than Trump, but who is equally radical and equally willing to violate norms.